So good day, everyone. Happy New Year. We are going to round up with the little bit of complex topics with JavaScript, and then from Thursday, Edmond will continue with the other topics that are not as complex. So the first thing we're going to look at today is a document object model. And when we say the DOM, we are talking about defining the HTML element as object. DOM is written DOM like this. So the HTML DOM is a standard for how we can get or we can add or delete or change HTML elements. And we can access the DOM by using JavaScript. Every time we load a web page, the browser creates the DOM for the page. And then with the DOM, we can access and change all the elements that we want. We can change the CSS, styles, and attributes. We can remove elements, we can add elements, we can add styles, we can change the value of different attributes to, the elements. We can even react to events and create new events. There's a limited number of things, or there's unlimited number of things that we can do with the DOM. We can use JavaScript to interact with HTML. We've seen previously that we have the document.get elements by ID. Something like this. And this is a method. We have several methods. We have get elements by tag name. We have get elements by class name. We have something we call query selector all. We can also have elements.set attributes. We can have things like create elements, and let's look at each of them one after the other in an example so that we can understand what they are. So when we have document.get element by ID, this is a method. If we say inner HTML, this is the property. We use the property to set and get the different values, and we use the method to define what it is that we want to do or to perform an action. So we have seen how to use documents.get element by ID. Let's look at how we want to use get element by class name, by tag name, how to change the CSS styles, and then we'll go back to look at how to use event listeners. Let me create new HTML elements that we can use to test out all of these things. I want to have a H1 tag, and this H1 will have an ID of heading1. So I'll just put as many as possible. So when we need to write to them, we have elements to use for practice. I want to also create, I have one called, let me put it paragraph 1. And I have paragraph 2. Let me have up to 5 paragraphs. So I have paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4, and paragraph 5. Also, for us to illustrate deeper, I want to have within the first paragraph, I want to have like I tags. Listen. So I'll have I. Let's put the class attribute with the value of error. And I'll close I. Now I have a style in my style sheet that makes anything with the class of error have a red text color. And when I start using JavaScript, you understand why I'm using all these tabs. So I'm just creating a number of HTML elements that we want to manipulate using JavaScript. And within the, let's say the third paragraph, for instance, let me use a bold tag. So you can use any HTML element and apply what we are trying to do. So let me say within this paragraph, I have two bold tags, and I want each of them to have a different text color. Now use the class attributes. I'll use this one, and I'll say class is equal to text. So let's just use this once, and then if we need more, we'll create. When we use documents.getElementById, by ID, we specify the ID, let's say paragraph 1. And in the inner HTML, what is the property? We want to set the text. And let's say this is the first property. And let's say paragraph. When I refresh, I have that printed to the page. But let's say we don't want to use the documents or get element by ID. Let's say we want to get elements by tag name. Now, when we say element by ID, we recognize that element is singular because ID can only recognize one element. ID is unique, so only one element can have a particular ID on a page. If you have multiple elements with the same ID name, then it becomes a problem because it is only going to use one of them and the rest of them will not be used. When we want to say get element by tag name, elements become plural because there are several tags on the page. So we say get elements by, and then we use tag name. So take note of the camel case. The first letter of every new word is in uppercase. So we say get elements by tag name. What we want to do here is to say we want to get all the elements or all the tags that are a B tag, and we have two of them here. We can't set the inner HTML of this. When we get elements by tag name, it saves all of these in an array that can be indexed, and then we have them index position 0, index position 1, until the last index position. So you can use the length property to be able to get the length of the tag, to know the amount or the number of B tags that you have on the page. But let's say what we want to do is to write today two different B tags. So we'll say, we'll assign this to a variable and say let's make it constant. Constant x is equal to this. And then we'll say x 0. Because x is now going to be an array. There are several tags, B tags on the page, and it's going to save all of them in an array called x. So let's get the first index position of x. We want to say x0.innerHTML, and here we want to set the first B tag to say this is the first bold tag. And let's set the second one to say this is the second bold tag. So let's refresh our page to see. So we don't have this printed on the page, and there must be a reason. So we want to get x0.innerHTML is equal to this is the first bold tag, and then the second one is this is the second bold tag. So the problem is I put .innerHTML here. We're supposed to just get the element by tag name, and then we now set the inner HTML of each of the tag. And then when I refresh, I have the two of them printed. Now using text info gives me the text in this color. Yes. Let's give me the text in this color. So I have both of them. Any question? Anybody with question? Okay, so let's look at the other one. Let's say we want to get elements by class name. Now let's try to use something with the class of error. This will also save like the tag that saved it as an array. So let's declare a variable. Let's say constant y is equal to document dot get element and is in plural by class name. And the elements we want to get the elements that have a class of error. And so we have two of them, and the two of them are the I tags within the p tags. So we want to get all the elements that has a class name of error. So we want the elements that has a class attribute and the value of the attribute is error. Let's do something else here. Let's say we want to get the length, the number of elements that has the class attribute with the value of error. Let's say let length y be equal to y dot length. And then we want to say document dot write, and we are going to just write this to the page. So let's see if this prints. So we have two elements and we should have two printed. So we have 0. So we want documents to get elements by class name error. And then we want to see the length of the elements that has a class of error. And then we want to print this to the page. And then we have 0, but it's not 0 because we have two elements with the class of error. So let's see what the problem might be. So when we use elements by class name, we do it in plural. We want to get the elements whose class name is error, E-R-R-O-R, which is correct. We want to look at the length. We store this in the variable lengthy is equal to y dot length. And then we say document dot write. We write this to the page, and then we get 0, which is not correct. So it's time for us to debug. And once we don't have an error on the page and the page is not blank, the console is not going to tell us exactly what the problem is. And so we can't see the issue here right now because we don't know why it's not printing 2, but it's printing 0 instead. So let's look closely again. We save the elements that we want to get by the class name in a variable called y. When we get elements by class name, we use elements in plural. We want all elements that the class name is error. We want to get the length of this, and then we want to print that to the page. So we have 0 printed, and we don't know why it is 0 printed. So let's see whether we made an error. Let's try to get another class and see if something else is the problem. So let's say we're looking for an element with the class of textinfo to see what happens. We have 1 printed, so it's the class of error that is the problem here. So I want to understand why this is the problem. And we still have 0. So let's see whether changing this class name might take away the problem. And so this is where we just keep debugging without even realizing what the error really is. So for now, I can't see the error because we have the class attribute with the name error, but it is not counting what we want it to count here. So let's say we want to check for, let's say, I will change this from error to, okay. So let me remove this. And the thought I have right now is because the first paragraph 1, we already set the inner HTML to have this is the first paragraph. So possibly that would have eliminated these two in the inner HTML. So if I change this to print out to paragraph 5 instead of 1, and then we leave this as error, it should be able to print 2, because now we have not rewritten what is in the inner HTML of the first p tag. And so when we refresh, we have 2, which is 2 I tag printed. So whenever you have an error, especially in JavaScript, where we will not be told what exactly the error is. And sometimes you will just get lost trying to debug, and the error might just be something as simple as we have already written to this p tag to overwrite what the tag contains. And changing that back to contain the I tag can now properly count the number of I tags that we have within the p tag. So that is how we use the get elements by class name. We also have something we call query selector, or is a method that we can use to get all the tags with a particular CSS selector and maybe selector value, and then we want to maybe change something, change the style or do something with it. So let's try to see, let's try to print one of the I tags and we'll see what the original color is. And then we'll try to change the color. So let's say instead of saying document.write here, we want to say y0 dot inner HTML is equal to, this is the first item. Let's see if this prints. So we have it printed in red. We want to change this red color to maybe have a background of black, so it will remain red text color and the black background color. So we can define another constant, which is a variable. Well, let's just replace this and say constant y is equal to document dot. This time we're not using get elements by class name, but we want to do something query selector, or, and in the parentheses we want to say what the element is and the selector that we want to use. So we want to say we want all I tags with a class attribute of error. So we want to see all the I tag with the class attributes whose name is error. We want to save this in Y, and what we want to do here now is to write to the inner HTML and then change the text color. So let's say Y0, or the background color, dot. And in JavaScript, we change CSS by using .style dot the name of the CSS property, and the property we want to change is the background. So we'll say .style background, and we want to change this to, let's say, black. So if all is well, this should have a black background and a red text. And so that is what we've done. If it's not the background color we want to change, and let's say we want to change the text color, so let's just override the color to say .style.color. I want to change the color of the text to, let's say, green. Save, refresh. And so we see how we can change CSS with JavaScript, and we use the method query selector all for us to be able to get a particular element with a particular selector specified. In this case, we want all I tags with a class attribute whose value is error. So these are the ways we use the different methods for the DOM. We have several other methods. I want you to research them, but this is basically how you will use the methods when you reset them and find them. These are the ones we will use most commonly when we develop. There are others that we can do using different nodes to create elements, to remove child, to append child, to replace child. Maybe we'll do an example of that. Let's even say here we want to insert an image, for instance. And I think I should have an image here. Let's see if there's an image on this. So I have an image called image1 here. And let's say, for instance, what I want to do here is to insert an image tag within paragraph 4. I can do something like this. Documents.get element by ID. And I want the element with the ID of paragraph 4. And what I want to put in the inner HTML is the image tag. So the image tag is within img, where I can just change the attributes or have an image tag with an ID and specify the source of the image or change the source of the image. So if you have like an application where somebody selects what they like, their favorite color or something, and when they select it, based on what they select, you want to change the style or the attributes. So now I want to insert an image within the p tag. And I'll put the image tag, I'll specify a source, and the source here will be, the name of the image is image1, and the extension is JPEG. So I'll just put that there. Source is equal to image1.jpg, and then we can put an alt attribute as always and say test image, and then this should do it because the image tag doesn't have a close tag. And when I save this and I put a semicolon, when I save this and I refresh my page, we should have an image inserted in the position of paragraph 4, and beneath it we'll have what we have for paragraph 5 here. Okay, so this is how we use JavaScript to work with elements, to change styles, and work with different attributes. And there are endless list of what we can do with this. So any question? Anybody with question, or is it clear? Okay, so let's see how we can actually use events. And when we have a particular event, we want to write to the inner HTML of something. Let's say, for instance, instead of having all of this, let me just delete this and use the heading. And then I have maybe a button. Let's use a button. And I'll close button. And then this button, I want to say click me. Right, I'm going to delete all of this. And let's see what the button looks like. So we have click me. We want to have an event. Let's say what event we want to have here is the click event. So put a button ID is equal to, let's say button 1, and then we'll have on click. So when you use events as an attribute, you put on click, on mouse over. But when we are doing things like event listeners, then we don't use on click, we use click events, mouse over events. So we remove the on prefix. So if it's an attribute, there's an on before the click. If it's not an attribute and it's an event listener we're defining, we just use click. So I'm going to look at that in a minute. So we'll say on click, and what we want to do when the button is clicked is we want to say document.get element by ID, and the element whose ID is, we want to get the element whose ID is, let's say heading 1, and we want to write the heading when the button is clicked. And what we want to do here is equal to, Welcome to JavaScript. And so when I save this and I refresh and I click the button, it gives me a text within the inner HTML of the heading. So any question before I move forward?
Questions from my
Okay. So let's look at how we create nodes, and then we try to maybe create a new HTML element and add text to a node and attach this node to a container and things like that. So this is something that you need to practice to really get an understanding. But I want to just illustrate in deeper detail how we can use JavaScript to create new HTML elements. There are different applications that you might create that will require this kind of skill. And so you have an idea. So let's say we have a paragraph tag. And so we have P tag, and it has the ID of para1. And let me close P. And then let me write within this and say this is the first paragraph. So we can print this to the page. Then let's say I have a div tag. Let's say this is a container. I'll say div and I'll put an ID of container and I'll close div. So what I want to do is to create a new element within the div tag, and I want to write to that new element that I will create within the div tag, and I want to use JavaScript to do this. So let me declare a variable. I'll use the constant keyword and I'll say create paragraph. And when we want to create a paragraph, we use document, or want to create an element, we use document.create element method. And then in the parentheses, we specify the element we want to create. I want to create a P element. I want to add text to the element I just created. So I'll put it in a variable also. Let's say add text is equal to, and I'll say, at this point, once I create an element, the next thing I want to use is to create text node, and I'll do document dot create text. I think this is how it's written. And then in the node, I want to put something like this text is added. Let's say something like that. And then I want to now append the text or append child. And I'm appending this child, this text I just created to the paragraph. And so I'm going to do create para, which is a variable, dot, and I'll use the method append child. So you need to practice to get an understanding. I don't know how much to explain this for you to see how these methods are used, but there are various use cases. I'm just trying to make it as basic so that you know the methods that exist and what you use them for. And I'm appending the child add text. Then I might want to add all of this, the P tag and the text has a child in the container, which means that I want it between the div tag. So I'm going to do something like constant container. I hope this is correct, but we'll test it. If not, we'll retrace. So say constant container is equal to document dot get element by ID, and we want the element whose ID is container. And the element whose ID is container we want to append a child to this element, and so we'll say container dot append child. So first of all, we use the append child method to append the text to the P tag. We also now use it to append that P tag with the text to the container. So it's going to be a child of the container. And if you remember in week 8 that we did I think it's in week 8 or in part 1 of the course that we looked at the different elements, sibling selectors and the different kind of selectors. We know which elements are child of a particular element and which ones are descendants of an element. And so we append child to the container and we'll say create paragraph. Because now we have the paragraph with the text and with the text appended, and we want to append all of this to the container. So I don't think I have to code this because it is a variable. So let's refresh and see if all of this works. So what I want to see on the page is this is the first paragraph, and then I also want to see this text is added here done. So we have both on the page. So take note of the elements, the methods that we use to create a new element, to add text to the element, to add this to the node, and to also append different stuff within elements or in the inner HTML without having to use inner HTML properties. So this is all we are going to cover about the document object model. I need you to read more and research more about it, but this is basically how we use them. So you'll find other methods. There are several other methods that we have not covered, but this will give you a head start on how to use the different DOM methods and properties that exist. So any question before we go to event listener?
Okay. I'm trying to understand this function. I understand you created the first element using the document.create element that presents this one as this is a paragraph that came out. Then you now added the text via DOM. That's the append child command. Then the way I'm not understanding is when you go to container document.get element ID container, then you now appended with create para. I thought this will add it to like once you get the container, which is the container function here.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying.
I thought it's going to add this is the first paragraph and then to add this is added via DOM. It's going to be in one line. That's what I thought it's going to do.
Yes, there are several ways you can do this, but I'm trying to illustrate the different methods that exist. So when you see a method document.create text node, it just means that you have created an element, you're adding a text node to it, which means you're adding a text to that element. So we created a p tag and we're adding a text to it, but we have not specified where we want the p tag to be. So when we create the p tag, create elements, then we now created a variable that holds the text. And then we use the append child method to add that text to the paragraph that we created by calling the variable name that holds the paragraph, create para dot append child, and the name of the variable that holds the text. Now we have finished with creating the element and the content of that element. Now we want to find somewhere to place this element. We have a container, the div tag. We want this new p tag we created to be between the start and end div tag. And so we create a variable and we name this variable container. And what we want it to hold is this, to get the div tag with the ID of container. So we store that in the container variable. And then now we want to append child to this container variable, which means that the whole p tag we created with the text, we want it to be within this. And so we create container.append child, and we use create para, which holds both the p tag and the text within the p tag. So we have now finished creating the p tag, and we have now decided that we are placing it within the div tag. That's all I did here.
I'm not sure.
Is it clear?
I'm not really getting it that deep, but maybe when I watch the video a couple of times or something, I will just understand.
Okay, let's do it this way. We are creating, do you recall your lessons on the different selectors, types of selectors we have? We have descendants.
I think that was week 8.
We see the different sibling and the child.
The child elements, parent elements, then the ones you can call the first start.
Yeah. Exactly. So now when you have a method, we have a method called append child, which means that When we put an append child within any element, we are making the element come between the start and end tag of that element. So we want this
Okay.
tag we have created to be a child of the div tag. That's just what we did here. The div tag, we got this div tag by getting the element that has the ID of container, which is a div tag. We stored that in the container, and now we use container.append child. Or we can just decide to go straight and say, instead of constant container, is document or get element by ID container dot append child directly. I broke it down so that create file. So this is the same as what we just did. So we decided to get the element with the ID of container, and we appended the child. We appended the p tag as a child of the element, which means it's going to be within the start and end div tag.
Okay.
So you,
Yeah, I understand.
yeah. So when you play around with it, you see that there are even shorter way you can write this. So instead of writing create para.append child add text, you can write them in one line, but it gets very confusing when you do it that way. So I'm breaking it down in such a way that you know why we're getting them separately. Then at some point you can just collapse them because you now understand them. So when you read and research these things, you see all of the different methods and what the different methods are used for. So let's look at event listeners. We looked at events in the last lesson. And when we have event listeners, it's more convenient because we just run the function instead of specifying what we want to do in the event with an HTML attribute. But now we want to write this as a JavaScript function and then fire this function when a particular event happens. And we have a method in JavaScript that we use. And this method is called add event listeners. So we have add event listener. I think this is the spelling. And we'll specify the event. So if it's a click event, so that's what I was saying. When we have it as a HTML attribute, we use on click, on mouse over, like all of this on. But when we use the add event listener, we don't put the on, we just put click event. Or we want mouse over event. So we remove the on or the on prefix when we use add event listener method. We also have remove event listener method, but let's look at the add event listener. So let's say we have a button now. We'll just use a button to illustrate this. So I have a button that says click me and a close button. Now, this button has an ID or button 1. And let's give the button a background color. Mouse is equal to, so I'm using this from my CSS, so you might not have that. So I have a red button that is clickable. What I want to do with JavaScript is to say if an element with the ID of button 1 is clicked, we want to run a particular function. If, let's say, maybe the mouse hovers, we want to do something. So let's say when it's clicked, we want to display an alert that says you clicked me. And then when the mouse moves over like this, we want to change the background color of this button from red to green, something like that. So what we'll do in JavaScript is to write a function. So I write 2 functions to boot. So let's say one function is called click me. And what I want to do with the click me is to just alert you clicked me. And then I want another function, and I want this function to be called, let's say, mouse over. And what I want to do with the mouse over is to say document dot get element by ID. We want to get the element whose ID is button 1, and we want to change the CSS. So we'll say dot style. The property we want to change is the background. I want to change the background color to green. So these are the 2 things we want to do. We have the functions now. We want to do something with this function. So above it, I'm going to do something like document dot get element by ID. And I want to get the element whose ID is button 1. And I want to add an event listener to the button. So dot add event listener like this. And then the event I want to add is the click event. I'm going to put this in quotes, click. And what I want to do, the button is clicked, is to run a function called Then I'll do the same thing again. So I'm going to do the same thing again here. Right. Document dot get element by ID button 1 dot add event listener. I want to add a mouse over event now. I'll put mouse over, and I want it to run a function called mouse over when a mouse over event is detected. So this is easier. We are using JavaScript to get the button, and then we want to add event listeners to the button. So you can add as many event listeners as possible to do several things with the button. So it's waiting for an event to happen with the button and runs a function when that event happens. So we are saying for this button, if a click event happens, we want it to display, to run this function, which will just give us an alert box that says you click me. If a mouse over happened, we hover around the button, we want it to say, the mouse just moved over me, and I want to change the color from red to green. And so let me refresh this. And then when I mouse over now, my arrow touches it, it should be green. And when I click on it, it should give me an alert. So this is how we add event listeners. And these are the things that we use to do things like session timeout or something, idle timeout. The system did not detect any mouse movements for 5 minutes. You want it to log the person out, things like that. And so these are some of the applications, and this is how we add event listener. So instead of having HTML attributes, we can decide that we want to go the route of using event listener methods and also remove event listener. So we want to add it, and then you want to use the remove event listener in the same way method if you hover again or mouse out. Yeah, so for the remove event listener, I'm going to add that to your lesson resource for you to see how to remove an added event listener. But for this example that we have the mouse out, we can't use the remove event listener method. We use the add, because what we are trying to do here is to add another event listener, which is not supposed to be the best way to do it. You can just remove an event listener that you've added, but the process is different from this process. So I will add that code to your lesson resource, and then you see how to use that. So I'm going to say add event listener on mouse out. So mouse out is the event, and it should run this function. So when I refresh, I mouse over, I have green, I mouse out, it goes back to red. So we should be able to remove and attach event listener without having to keep adding event listeners to reverse what we have done. And so I'm going to add that to your lesson resource. So any question before I move to the next topic?
I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
So for the event mouse over and mouse out, I observed the variables created for the function.
Sorry, I can't hear you clearly.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay. So actually, I want to ask a question so others can understand as well. The event click and mouse over that we created variables for.
Yeah.
For function. So I wanted to add the mouse over spelling. The reason why we have the other mouse over as calculator, that mouse is calculator over, is so we don't have the same spelling as the event spelling. Or is it? I don't
No.
know.
The first spelling mouse over like this is the name of the event, and these are JavaScript keywords. This is a click event, this is a mouse over event. I decided to create my own functions to have the name similar to the event, but I changed the spelling just so that it's not a JavaScript keyword.
Okay, yes, that's what
Okay. So if there's no question, let's look at the last topic for the day. Anybody with a question? Somebody trying to say something?
Yes, then I can say something, but I think it's not.
Okay, maybe you type the question in the chat and then we'll get to it. Okay, so for object-oriented programming, we define something we called, or something we can call a template for creating objects. JavaScript object-oriented programming is not as defined as other programming language, but it's very basic. It's creating a template for which we can create several objects. Let's say, for instance, we want to create a class. And we want this class to be called people. From this people class, we want to be able to create several persons. So instead of having to create different variables for millions of people, we can just create a class called people, define the properties, and then begin to create or instantiate new objects from these people that uses all of the methods that we defined and the properties that we have defined. And so we create a class in JavaScript using the class keyword, written class with lowercase, and then the name of the class, which by convention we start with uppercase. So we say we want to create a class called people. The class keyword and the name for the class, you use a curly brace like this. And within the curly brace, you want to define the properties, and we use a constructor keyword like this. If you don't define a constructor to list the properties, JavaScript is going to create an empty constructor for you. And so we have constructor here and a pair of curly brace. And within this constructor, we want to define all of the properties that the people class has. So it's just like how we created objects and we say every person has a name, an age, a sex, a height. So the properties are now just going to be those things that everybody have in common. And so we have first name, we have, let's say last name, we have age, and we have sex. Now we want to say each of these property, we want to define them to give them a value. Now remember or recall that we use the this keyword to just refer to what we are talking about. So this now refers to this class. So we're saying this dot first name is equal to, we want it to be any name passed to the first name constructor. We want the last name to be equal to any name passed to the last name class. We want to be whatever we pass as age in the parameter, and we'll have this dot sex to be equal to sex. So we have created a class, and we have created the template from which we can create objects. Now we have a class called people. We want to start talking about the people in the class, and we want to talk about each individual now. So we create a variable to hold each person. And so we say constant person1 is equal to, we instantiate a class, an object, or create an object of the class by using the new keyword and then the name of the class. So new people. No, the remove event listener was not sorted out, Emmanuel. So in your lesson resource, I'm going to post a code for how to use remove event listener. It's a different process from the add, and I don't want to derail that particular class. So I'm just going to add the code to see how you can remove event listener that you've added to your code. Okay. So I'm just answering a question on the chat. So when you create a class, you create objects from the class. We create objects from each class by using the new keyword. New, and then the name of the class, and then in a pair of parentheses, we want to define all of these properties that we listed in the constructor. So let's say we want a person whose first name is Jane, the last name is Doe, let's say the age is 30, and then we'll say the sex is female. And then we have person 2, and then we can create a new object from the class, new people. And this new person now will be, let's say, James. The last name is, let's say, Brown. Then the age, let's say, is 32. And then the sex is male. So if we want to now the last name of person 2, for instance, let me create an element here. Let's say P plus P. So I'm going to create 3 paragraphs. And let the ID here be equal to, let's say, para 1, and the ID here is equal to para 2, and the ID here is equal to para 3. So we want to say documents or get element by ID. We want to get the element whose ID is, let's say, para 1. And in the inner HTML, we want to display person1, which is the name of the object that holds all the properties of person1. So I want to say person1 dot. We're trying to get the first name of person1. I want this to be printed to the first paragraph. Second paragraph, let's say we want to get person2 dot, let's say person2 dot sex. So we should have Jane male printed to the page. So when I refresh this, I have Jane male printed. And so this is how we create objects from a class, and then we access those objects within the class. So this is as basic as it gets using class and objects. Object-oriented programming is something that is easy but easily confusing if you do not practice it properly. So we have something we call inheritance, and you'll see this in other programming language where you want to inherit the methods and properties of another class. And in JavaScript, we use the extend keywords. I think in almost all languages, extend keyword is what we use to be able to inherit properties and methods of another class. So let's say we have this people class. We want to have a class called, let's say group, for instance. We want to create a group out of the people. So let's have a class here. And while we do this inheritance, the whole purpose of inheritance is to be able to reuse code. So if I want to have a group, and the group are a group of people, those people have a first name, last name, age, sex. I don't want to redefine this one. So I want to inherit something from a parent, which is the people class. So just look at inheritance as just the way we inherit in real life, that you inherit something from somebody, from your parents. So we're going to be inheriting all of the methods and properties from the people class, because now the group class will be a child class and the people class will be a parent class. And so we create a class called group, and we use the extend keywords like this, and we want to extend the people class, which means inherit the people class. When we do this, we create a constructor method. Now I'll tell you what you do with this. If we have a constructor, and in the constructor, let's say we have first name, this time we have middle name that we don't have in the first one, and we have last name, we have age, and we have sex. Now we have this, but we don't want to redefine first name, last name, age, and sex because they're in the parent class. What we do now is to use a super method, which helps us to inherit all these definitions. And what we are inheriting is all of these definitions apart from the middle name. And so I'll put it here and I'll delete middle name. So I want to inherit first name, last name, age, and sex from the parent class. Super just means inherit all of this property definition from the parent class. And then I want to define the middle name, which I don't have anywhere. So this dot middle name is equal to middle name. So this is how we inherit stuff from other classes. So I've defined a class called group. We're not going to be building an application with this, but this is the use case where we are creating an app where we have maybe an education site where you have all the students and you want to put the students in group. So you now have a class called people that lists all the students in the school. And then you have a class called group that maybe, or classroom that groups the students in different classes, and you inherit from the people or the student class, something like that. And so this particular people class, this particular group class wants to add a middle name to all of the students' name. Another thing we do with classes is to have methods within them. Methods are like function, but we're not using the function keyword. We just create, let's say, full name. We have a method called full name like this. And in the full name method, all we want to do is that if this method is called, we want to return first name, middle name, and last name. So we say return this dot first name plus, let's put a space, plus this dot middle name plus, we use another space, plus this dot last name. So let's say we want a method called full name within the class definition, the group class definition. And now we already have person one defined, but person one has first name, last name, this, but now we are going to be defining or creating the object of person one from the group class and not from the people class, because the group class has a middle name to it. And then we are going to add a middle name to the definition that we already have. So let's say Jane Stone, and then we'll have a middle name for, I'll put a comma, a middle name for James. And let's say the middle name here is, let's say Gates. And then if you want to access this, or we want to say we want to print into paragraph 1, but this time what we want to print is the full name. And so we're going to call the method full name, which is what we have here. So we'll say person1 dot full name. Now we're going to print all this with the parentheses. And when we save this and refresh, we have the full name Jane Stone Doe printed here because we wanted to return when the method full name is called, the first name, middle name, and last name. And so this is just a basic way of how we inherit properties from a parent class and how we create new property within the child class and inherit all of the property that we already defined within the constructor of the parent class without having to define them in the child class. And then we can create method within our class definition to be able to do something. Okay. So any question? So you get the recording as soon as I am able to get over with it. It will be posted on YouTube like the others, and you will get your course resource uploaded in your class resource along with week 19 content with all of the code. And I will remember to add a note on how to remove event listeners when event listener is added. So we refer to your lesson resource for week 19, and I will send an email when that is uploaded for you to get all of the full code of what we have discussed and any extra notes that might help you understand it better. For the rest of the course, your live classes will be handled by Edmond from Thursday. I just stepped in to take topics that might be too difficult or a little more complicated and is not as comprehensive in the weekly videos. So anybody with a question before we end this lesson? Yeah, all the previous class recordings are already uploaded on YouTube. I don't think I sent an email when those were uploaded, but they were uploaded over the holidays on YouTube. So if you go to YouTube, I would have put the link in your class announcement for week 18. But we'll share the links on Discord for those of you who have not seen that, for you to be able to watch those videos, but they're already uploaded on YouTube. Okay, so we will continue over chat, and then on your weekly uploads, you will get other messages that are relevant to the course. You have about 3 weeks to the end of the course, so I want you to revise everything that you have done from week 1 up to week 20. Week 20 will be the last week of lessons. Week 21 will be mostly review, projects, and assignments. And I think all of your previously open assignments are due midnight Atlantic Standard Time today. And so hopefully you are able to get an understanding of everything that you need to know for the assignment. And I will see you next week.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye.